There's a common illusion when you're setting and adjusting your white balance that can make editing very frustrating. We can see an example of it here with this room that's dominated with white features that appears to have a little bit of a blue tint to it. But when we zoom in on just the cabinetry, we look at this cabinetry and it does look like it has neutral colors. That would be the illusion. If we look really closely, we can see that there are also other tones. But believe it or not, there's a lot of magenta in here and there's a lot of blue in here, more than what it looks like when we get in close. This illusion is known as color constancy. It can make editing very frustrating. It's our brain's ability to do an automatic white balance adjustment, and it does it all the time. That's why cameras can't get it right all the time, because cameras don't have the brain power that our brains do. But I'm going to show you how to detect where color constancy is getting the better of you, why it's happening, and then once you see what's really going on behind the scenes with some of this color science, I'm going to show you how then to adjust for this and make it accurate every single time. So taking a look at this image, if we zoom in here a little bit, we can see that it looks fairly neutral, maybe a little bit of blue cast, but the color is changing throughout. If I go over here and I were to take, for instance, the color picker tool, I could click around these areas and sure enough, I'm getting a lot of blue. When I go up to the warm areas though, what's happening is I'm getting a red, not really much of an orange, and when I get between the two, I'm going to start running into different magenta tones, like here. So this tells us that we are starting to dominate into the blue region, and we can see that if we take a look at a color wheel. On this color wheel, we can see that if I'm dominated in blue, my closest thing is going to be magenta, maybe some greens, but if I'm really heavily in blue, here I am. If we want to go to the other side over here and get into the warm tones, instead of blues, I should be in green. And this is why tint matters a lot. So taking a look at a color gamut of this, we can see why the tint here on this axis does matter as we change our color temperatures, because as we go from very cool temperatures to very warm temperatures, in between there is our magenta. But the opposite is true when we start getting into some of the greens. That's why if we warm our temperatures, then we also need to change the tint. Usually warming the temperatures into these warm tones means that we need to add more green, but if we start cooling them, then we should add more magenta. Another way to test this too, by the way, if you're in Photoshop, is to duplicate that layer. I did Ctrl-J, and then you would go to Filter and then to Blur, Average, Blur. This gets you one color of the entire room. It's just an average of everything. If you sample this color, anywhere on the layer doesn't matter, you can see here that we are dominated in the blue region. So we're obviously very cool, but we're also seeing magentas. We need to compensate both temperature and tint. So in this case, if I were to take just the white balance dropper, just as an example, and if I were to click someplace on the ceiling, then I'm going to get something that is warmed up to 5000 Kelvin, but it turned green. That's because it's also picking up magentas. I can click around different areas here and I'm going to get different results. This ended up being very red and very warm. So instead, I'll back out here to where we were when we started. It's best to do this manually, knowing about how much you should change. Now, in Lightroom Classic, you can also measure some of these values to see how far off you are. The Photoshop was really, when I was over there, is more of an academic exercise. But in reality, when you're in production mode here, just taking any icon here, watch what happens up here on the histogram, you'll see the RGB change. So I can go around here and start seeing all the different colors. And right here, for instance, I see that blue is 76, red is 71. Everywhere I go, I see more blue than I do red. Up here on the ceiling, I can still see, even though that looks like it's red and it's warm, it still has a lot more blue than it does red. That optical illusion isn't telling us everything, but we do know that we've got too much blue. So what I would first do then is increase the white balance here. So instead of 4800, let's increase that to, let's say, 5100. But doing that means we also need to lower our tint. So instead of being at 13, we need to lower that to maybe probably about 8. When we do, now we're having something that looks like it should be more neutral. If we go back to once again where we were before and to where we are now, we've got something that looks a lot more accurate. And as we move our mouse around now, we can see that the RGB is pretty much the same for these neutral areas. So instead of having this, when we go to edit this picture, this is what we have now to edit with. This is then with the ambient luminance applied to make this flambient image. Now this was shot wide and hide so that I can crop it down. By cropping it down, I get that fake tilt shift effect where I can go here and then crop this down. I just want to show really the kitchen island, so I can do that. And now that we're in here especially close, we can see that this does look like a more neutral color correct image. And of course, a lot of the color correction comes by incorporating flash. This used that flambient technique, and if you're not familiar with that and incorporating flash into interior photography, I've got courses that can help you on that. For instance, my course on professional interior photography, and I do have links to all of my courses down in the description for this video. Now that we have a very well color-corrected image using the proper white balance and tint, you'll still notice that there are some other colors that are casting from different sources, mainly the lights that were used in this room. Let's go over to Lightroom Classic and take a closer look at what's going on. And here in Lightroom Classic, this is a shot that was used as the window pull repair shot. So here's my window pull that I was going to use, and then this is its repair shot. Well, this, as you probably know from my tutorials, courses, and books, this is just the same as a window pull, just without any flash. So this is pure ambient at what I was using to hit my flash shots when I was doing this. This just happens to have flash, but it's the same exposure as this. So we can see that this is going to have some color from these areas that will be left into the room. Now, that could be natural, could be desired, especially underneath of the cabinets, which we have when we're doing our flambient blending over here. So we've got this nice warm tone that's underneath of here. But we've got a lot of warm tone up here and a lot less here. And this is where then you could use some of the small color correction techniques like I show in my course on expert editing for interiors. Those things will then get rid of some of those other cast issues that you have. But the longer you look at this image, also the more white it's going to look because of the color constancy illusion. So once again, if you're really thrown off, you're really not sure if your white balance is correct, which happens a lot on these scenes that are dominated with these white features, then you can just take your color picker, you go up to the very top layer, make sure you're not on a mask, but on a layer, and start clicking around. Start seeing what your RGB is. Does it make sense for where this should be in the room? Sure, I've got still a little bit of blue down here, but I've got a little bit of warmth and magenta up here. Is it as bad as what it was? Not nearly so. And you also don't want to completely sterilize the image and completely remove all the color. But you do need to have a base to start working with that has the color correct white balance, and then from there you can decide where natural color then should be.